Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. And happy Diwali, happy Kali Puja. And if you're doing this online, then if you're sleepy, you can fall asleep with impunity. That's assuming impunity's already asleep, but she probably is. So, but if you are awake, we will continue with Swami Abhedananda's chapter on the ego, self, and sensation. And we are, let's see, here we are, about halfway through. So hopefully we'll finish this tonight. So, would you like to read a little?
Each individual ego is an individual center which calls itself I. Anything related to that center is mine, and anything referring to the center is me or mine. This thought rises in the ego, and we cannot think of anything apart from the sense of which is the center of our individual existence. That is the reason why we do not take any interest in anything which is not related to consciousness or the sense of me or mine.
I think those are supposed to be I's. Those slashes got, the I got reduced to a slash, so I consciousness or the sense of I.
This is true of all men and women, nay, of all beings. The self-study in this light means we have studied all individual human beings. Everyone's doing the same thing. If you know your own ego, you've known the ego of others, whether human or non-human. Because in all living creatures, there is an ego or the sensation of I. Take the case of a dog, for instance. It knows what its earthly existence is. Either directly or indirectly, it is conscious of itself. And it feels pleasure or pain. It suffers and enjoys, and that is done by the individual ego of the dog. Wherever there is any expression of consciousness or intelligence, there is the sense of I. Even in the vegetable kingdom, there's a slight manifestation of the sense of I. And therefore, the great thinkers of the world have called the sense of I in vegetables the vegetable souls. The vegetables have souls not of the same degree of manifestation as that of the human souls. The difference is only in degree. They have less manifestation than that in lower animals. And then in a minute animalcule which moves. It is within the very grossest or lowest kind of consciousness, where the sense of I is very faint, more like the consciousness in a dream state. Or perhaps we may call it a subconscious sense of I.
Yeah, all right. Well, he's probably familiar with the experiments that Jagadish Chandra Bose did in his lab in India, where he showed that there was some sort of sentiency even in plants. And he was following work, I think, that with electrodes where he could show that there was some sort of sensation. And this was done also by a polygraph expert in the United States many years later named Cleve Baxter, where he was doing experiments with the polygraph. That's his business. And for some reason, he just got the idea that what would happen if I connected this to the philodendron? So he connected it to the philodendron, and he wanted to see how it would react if he watered it. He assumed that the resistance would actually go down, since more moisture would cause the resistance to go down and the electricity would flow more easily. And he actually found that the plant did react, but not in the way he thought it would. It seemed to react in a different way. And so then he thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I tried to dehydrate it and hold a match under it. So he didn't have any matches, but he knew the person in the office next door was a smoker. So he went next door to get a match and came back, and he noticed that the polygraph had actually reacted when he had the thought of holding a match underneath the leaf. So this got into a whole series of experiments that he did with plants. And then, of course, if you've ever read the old book called The Secret Life of Plants, and they also made a video of it, kind of a music video with Stevie Wonder. It's very hippie 70s kind of a video. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. Shows some of those experiments that have been done. It's very difficult, though. These kinds of experiments are so sensitive that they tend to pick up the energies of the experimenter as well as of the plants. And so they're difficult to reproduce because of that. And so some people haven't been able to reproduce them. But there are some interesting things, and apparently the then Soviet Union were doing experiments with plants as well. And they actually set up a whole greenhouse to see if they could program the plants to water themselves, so that when they were feeling thirsty, the sprinklers would go on, and if they wanted more light, the lights would go on. And it doesn't go into a lot of details, but it looked like it was working when you read about it in the book or see it on the video. And then they had another one where they, this was all done with, as though this was the Soviets talking. I don't know whether it was or not, but anyway. They had somebody come in and take a cabbage off of or a cabbage plant, and actually kind of rip the cabbage plant up into pieces. And then they took another cabbage plant and hooked it up to the polygraph, and they had 6 people walk through the room, one of whom was the one that had ripped the cabbage plant. And when the one that walked through that had ripped the cabbage plant walked through, the polygraph made a big spike in the reading. So all sorts of fascinating things. And it's kind of peculiar that more work hasn't been done along these lines. But definitely it looks like there is some sort of consciousness, even though there isn't a nervous system in a plant that we know of. And yet there does seem to be some sort of consciousness. And then, of course, from the other side, you can see that there's some practical applications that some people have been able to use by sort of tuning in to the plants. Probably the most famous examples are George Washington Carver and Luther Burbank. George Washington Carver used to say that he would go out at night when the general atmosphere was the quietest, and he could listen to the plants, and he would try to find out the uses of the plant, because he was trying to help the people that were struggling to make an existence in the South. And the South has a very depressed economy. This is shortly after the Civil War, as I remember. So the people were struggling, and they were trying to live off the land and so forth. And so he would go out, and he did a lot of work with peanuts, and found out all sorts of uses for peanuts that were useful. And Luther Burbank was a plant breeder, and he would ask the plants to cooperate with him and try to produce something good. And he produced an astounding variety of plants. And of course, plant breeding had been known for years. You just hybridize a lot of plants, and if you make enough crosses, eventually you might get something that's good. 1 out of 1,000 might be interesting, or a little better than the parents. But when he came out with his first catalog, the people that, the plant people, the back east looked at the catalog and thought, Lord, this man must have, hundreds of acres and an army of assistants going around making crosses and selecting and so forth. And they came out and they found Luther Burbank with a couple of assistants on a little parcel in Santa Rosa, and they were just flabbergasted that anyone could have achieved those kinds of things. But again, he claimed that it was because he could communicate with the consciousness of the plant and that they would cooperate with him. And it's interesting to know that he was actually a meditator. He had studied with Self-Realization Fellowship and knew how to meditate and was familiar with these ideas of consciousnness pervading all things. So if consciousness pervades all things, it should pervade the plants as well. And of course, Jagadish Chandra Bose also did experiments with metals, and he did a presentation at the Academy of Sciences in London where he showed pictures of graphs of reactions, and he didn't tell them what it was. And then he compared them with the muscle reactions, hooking up a detached muscle. In other words, a muscle fiber that was actually not part of a living thing, but it was still had some life in it. And he showed that metal fatigue and muscle fatigue showed very similar graphs. In fact, they really couldn't tell them apart. Wasn't very popular with the scientists in London at that time. They were quite skeptical. But anyway, so this just shows that the idea that consciousness is all pervading is real, that it's not just a philosophical idea, but that there really is consciousness in all things. All right, so let's see, where are we here? Here? Are we here?
Here we find.
Here we find, all right.
Here we find our relation with the universe in which we live. Having understood our own individual ego, having also realized that all individual egos are of similar nature, and they all mean the center of I, we, and mine, we begin to trace our relation to this universe. How can you do it? Take all the individual egos of this world, from the highest human being to the lowest vegetables, and take them in their totality collectively. This individual sense of I, when taken collectively, will be composed of millions and millions of the sense of I. That would be the cosmic ego. That cosmic ego is higher than our individual egos, because each individual sense of I means a portion of this collective sense of I. If you can close your eyes and withdraw your mind from the external world and think of this one sense of I manifesting through countless individual entities, some of which are human, while some others are animal and vegetable, how big that idea will be. It will be like one universal whole of which we are bit parts. Each individual sense of I will be then a part of this cosmic I or cosmic ego.
Yes, it reminds me, what was it in Star Wars, Princess Leia sensed when that planet blew up or something, and she felt it in the, what did she call it? I can't remember. Anybody remember that scene where the bad guys had blown up some planet, and she felt it in her soul because she was being princess, she was connected with all things. And so when that whole planet of beings was destroyed, it affected her. So, and there are interesting stories too. We used to have, when my parents were getting elderly and needed an attendant, they had a lady that would come and drive them and so forth. And she had a pet tarantula, and she swore up and down that if there was an earthquake someplace, the tarantula just before would go into the corner of the cage, or the, what do you call it, aquarium type thing, and turn on its back and just lie there upside down. And, there'd be an earthquake, in some distant place of California or other part of the North America or someplace. And it would somehow have that sense that there was going to be an earthquake. So we are all tuned into that more or less. And of course, people that develop their psychic abilities are attuned to various aspects of that. That's how they intuit things. Of course, the trouble is figuring out what you've been intuited into. That sometimes the vibrations and messages are not all that clear. And if you're really connected to a lot of things, how do you sort it all out? It would be like getting all 185 TV channels at the same time and trying to figure out what's on TV. So connecting into the cosmic consciousness isn't as simple as it sounds, but it definitely is possible. And that's, of course, one thing that meditation allows somebody to do. But of course, we don't recommend people try to get into any psychic powers, because that can be kind of distracting. I remember one devotee, when she started to meditate, she started getting these sensitivities. She started being able to pick up other people's thoughts. And so she came and asked the Swami at that time what to do. And she says, "Oh, I know, it's such a nuisance, isn't it?" Because you've got enough thoughts of your own, and you get other people's thoughts popping into your head. So you have to kind of know how to control that, and it's not all that easy, and that it can get distracting. It's hard enough controlling your own thoughts without having to monitor what everybody else is thinking. All right, let's see. Where are we? Down at the bottom now?
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to read a little? Okay.
Now, what is this cosmic ego? You see how from an individual we are going to the universal by studying the individual self. We are studying everybody. Unless you know yourself, you cannot know the self of others. When I lift my hand or move it, how do you know it? Because you do the same by referring to your own self. When anybody feels pain and you sympathize with that person, how do you sympathize? You sympathize by putting yourself into that person's condition. That is all you do. If you were hurt in that way, you would suffer pain. If anybody is crying or suffering, how do you know? If you put yourself in their thoughts and conditions, you would do the same. Of course, you cannot act it in the same way because you are not conscious of the psychological process. But even unconsciously or subconsciously, you put yourself in their thoughts and conditions, or remember something of a shocking nature which happened to yourself. And that is the way you sympathize with another person and try to relieve that pain. Otherwise, you would not do so. Thus, if you analyze that feeling, you will find that you can only sympathize with or do anything for another by being conscious of what is going on in the mind of another only by referring to your own sensation or perceptions or feelings which you have in yourself. There's no other way of knowing it. Now, how do you know that other people have souls? Because you yourself have a soul. How do you know that dogs have senses? Because you yourself have that kind of senses, or you would do the same thing or express yourself in a similar way under those conditions. And if we take these isolated individuals collectively, it means we have taken the whole universe.
And there's, I think sometimes animals are actually more conscious of things on a psychic level than people are, because they don't have the ability to talk and think in words. And so they tend to be a little bit more tuned in. And there's a whole book about animals that knew when their owners were coming home, I think was the title of the book, something like that. And it went into lots of similar things too, but there are so many examples of where usually a dog would know when the owner was about to come home. So perhaps one spouse would be at home, and they would notice that the dog would suddenly start getting excited. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, the spouse would come home from work and the dog would greet him at the door and so forth. And so somehow the dog knew when the owner was coming home before they were even in the driveway. So they seem to be attuned a little bit more, I think, possibly because they don't have the ability to speak and to think in terms of words. They tend to pick up things a little bit more psychically than others would. They also seem to be a good judge of character. So if you've ever had a pet, and sometimes if somebody comes to the door, maybe a salesman or a friend or something, the pet will react differently to that person, depending on whether there's a good feeling or a bad feeling with it. It might be that the person is afraid of animals, or that maybe they're just not, if it's just some stranger, they're not really a good person or so forth. My sister used to say that about her cat, that if somebody came to interview for a job, she could tell right away how the cat was reacting. If the cat just hid under the desk, she had a feeling, this is probably not the person I'm supposed to hire. They seem to be tuned in a little bit more than we are, I think, sometimes. All right, I'd take a turn here. There may be beings in the distant planets and the stars, and if there be a being of any kind, that being also must have a sense of I. Otherwise, it would not be a being. Of course, there's some science fiction movies where they have a collective sense, isn't it? Where they all feel kind of connected to each other. I don't watch enough movies to remember any of them, but it seems to me I've seen snippets of some show or movie that had that idea. Otherwise, it would not be a being. What was the one where Cocoons, wasn't that one? There was a movie called Cocoons, and didn't that have something to do with it? They did things on kind of a psychic level and a connection. They were all kind of interconnected in some way. Anyway, we need some TV expert here. Can you think of any?
That was an episode of a cartoon.
Oh.
And there was this planet called Unity. And she was everybody in the planet.
Yeah.
Everything. She was
Yeah.
outside Unity.
Ah.
That was wonderful.
All right, and let's see, going on, it says, and wherever there is a sense of that sense of I, wherever there is sense of that sense of I, must be of that nature. It doesn't make sense. There's something missing there. So we have taken the whole universe and have found our relationship with the intelligent universe and not with the dead matter. Dead matter is the grossest thing. Just tell that to your pet rock. Anybody old enough to know about pet rocks? That was a big thing. When was that? About the 80s or something? Yeah, somebody actually made money selling rocks, and they called them pet rocks, and people would buy them. All right. We started with the object of the senses, but we have come to the realm of consciousness now. The sense of I, or the ego, that which says, I am here, I am sitting here, I am talking, or I am listening, or I walk, or I go home, I do this, and I have duties, and so on, and which is the thinker, doer, and perceiver, cannot exist if there is no sense of I. So that would speak to the idea of artificial intelligence. You can make something that mimics intelligence, but does that thing actually have a sense of I? Of course, if it's the computer in the 2001 Space Odyssey, I guess it has a sense of I. Remember that Hal, the computer, didn't want to be disconnected. And Dave the computer had gone crazy and started eliminating all the people on board, and Dave was the last one left, and so Dave was going to go up there and disconnect this computer, and the computer kept saying, I wouldn't do that, Dave. I wouldn't do that, Dave. He was going up there and he was going to get the computer turned off. So anyway, I always think of that when my computer's malfunctioning and it's, I'm going to have to reboot it. I'm going to reboot you. Yeah, I'm going to reboot you whether you like it or not. All right. So you want to take a turn reading?
Let's see, where are
There
we?
are different personalities.
There are different personalities. Some persons manifest a certain personality, and that personality may be cut off. The relation of that personality may be cut off from other personalities, but still each personality has the sense of I connected with it. There may be 20 different personalities in one human being. There cannot be 20 different souls in him. There is only one soul or ego, which expresses or puts on a different garment of thought form, and that makes a different separate personality. But the connection is not cut off from the individual ego. The sense of I unites all sensations and is the cause of individual identity. For instance, how do you know that you were the same person that you were yesterday? How do you know it? The sense of identity is caused by the ego. The sensations and perceptions which you had in the morning are pigeonholed in your mind in the form of concepts and percepts. Sensations are gone, leaving the impressions, samskaras, upon your mind substance. And who connects these impressions of various kinds? Who has combined them together if there be no one intelligent entity above all? The sensations cannot be our individual ego. They simply leave impressions on the mind substance, and it is the individual ego who reads them, translates them, combines them, mixes them, and produces that close relation which is at the foundation of our sense of identity.
Yeah, that's interesting. Brings a couple of things to mind. One is there's a certain area of the brain that allows you to remember relationships with yourself. And if that part's damaged, you don't have any short-term memory. And so everything is a brand new experience. And there was one case of a man who had that damage, and every time the wife would come in, it's so the first time he had seen her in days, oh, I'm so glad you've come. And she could have just left a few minutes ago to go get something for him. And it was great reunion every single time because he had no sense that had happened to him. Then this idea of multiple personalities. You see, William James, I know, who's one of the early psychologists in the United States, went to some of Vivekananda's lectures, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if he continued at the New York Center and listened to Swami Abhedananda, but I don't have any direct knowledge of that, but it would certainly make sense. But Abhedananda's definitely well informed about the ideas of psychology, and this idea of multiple personalities is an extremely interesting one, and would I should probably do more study on that, see some interesting connections. But one particular thing I remember reading is that one person with multiple personalities had different physical ailments in different personalities. For example, in one personality, they could eat strawberries and citrus fruits and so forth, and no problem. But if they were in another personality, they were allergic to strawberries and citrus fruits, and they would break out in hives. I mean, this isn't just in their head, they'd break out in hives. So there's something very peculiar going on, and I'm not sure we really understand the relationship between those multiple personalities and the individual, what exactly is happening there. So let's see, where are we? Oh, yeah, on the top of this page. All right, do you want to continue?
Now we have come.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have come so far to the sense of I. Here comes the difficult problem again. We will have to analyze this sense of I and proceed further. That is not the end of all. We are going to the ultimate reality of the universe. The ego would be now the starting point of our venture. It has nothing to do with the body, though at present the sense of I is deeply related to it. When you think of yourself either as a man or a woman, either young or old, it is simply because of the sense of I which you possess. But put that aside. Think of yourself as an entity. Of course, your body is connected with other different relations. And whatever relations may interfere with your sense of I at present, it will be always meaningful only in relation to the body or blood relations or some other kind of relation. This sense of I is not the ultimate reality of the universe, but it is the manifestation. It is the starting point or beginning of differentiation. The sense of I also produces the sense of not I, or in other words, the sense of the ego produces the sense of non-ego. That is the first differentiation of the spirit and the matter. When the cosmic ego, which is the one universal I, becomes conscious of itself, there was the other side of it, which was not I, or the non-ego. If you think I am this, it also means that I am not that. Similarly, I am this body means I am not this chair. The very sense of I includes the sense of what I am not, which is non-ego. Now this is the first differentiation. When the cosmic ego becomes conscious of itself, that was the beginning of the existence of matter differentiation. The sense of I, or the ego, is a blending of two factors. The one is a changeable thing, and the other is unchangeable. The changeable part is that which is progressing and which is subject to evolution. For instance, I am a child, then I'm a young boy or a young girl, then I'm a youth, then I'm mature, I'm a thinker, I'm a doer, I'm walking. Now here you will notice that in all these qualifications of the sense of I, there is a double quantity. Thinker is not the same as doer, and doer is not the same as perceiver. But there's another part which is not changing. I am this, I am that, I am sitting, I am walking, I am reading. That something which is unchangeable is a constant quantity. Now therefore it is a mixture of changeable and unchangeable somethings. What is this changeable something? The changeable something is the foundation of the phenomenal universe of the body, of the sense organs, and of external objects. It is called in modern science the energy. It is the source of evolution. The universe has come out into its present state by the process of evolutionary energy. What is meant by energy? Energy means forces in their latent state. All the external world is nothing but the manifestation of force. And when that force does not exercise the power in any form, but remains dormant, it is called energy.
Yeah, I remember John Dobson used to say that the ego is a genetic invention. That was the way he put it. He said it's invented by the biological organism so that it can distinguish self from non-self. And so it knows what things are good for it and what things aren't good for it. And by so differentiating, it can survive better in the universe and pass on its genetic code. So that's why he calls it a genetic invention. Your genes have this need to pass themselves on. And so in order to pass themselves on, they need to be able to survive and reproduce. And in order to do that, they have to distinguish between self and non-self. And so he called this ego a genetic invention. That's why it's so difficult to get rid of. Our egos aren't that easy to overcome because it's built into us. We all come from a long line of people that had to reproduce in order to get us. If you count your ancestors going backwards, you get multiplied by 2 every generation. And all of those people were very good at distinguishing self from non-self and survived and had kids. So we're genetically programmed to have this ego for self-preservation. And so to transcend that ego is the challenge of spiritual life. And so we do that through the various yogas. We try to be more unselfish. That's one way of reducing the ego. We try to still the mind and calm the senses and not get distracted by them. That's another way of reducing the sense of ego. We constantly remind ourselves that we're not the body and we're not the mind, but we're one with the universal self. That's Jnana Yoga. Or we turn our emotions to become attached to a role model of someone who has overcome their ego as an avatar, a saint, or a deity, which represents that state of consciousness. And since we have an ability to sort of absorb qualities from somebody that we're with, or somebody that we like, or somebody that we admire, then by turning that love and devotion and attention to a role model, then that's one way of getting some of those qualities yourself. And so that's bhakti yoga. So those are the ways we try to get over the ego. All right, so we just have a few minutes left, and since we've been playing a little bit of the music from the Mother Aspect Oratorio, and we just had Kali Puja, I thought we'd end with the last two sections of that work. And in this section, the Devi tells people that if they recount her deeds, that they will be rewarded with protection from her. And then the chorus sings that the same thing, is that no words are adequate to extol the greatness of the Devi, but we will recount your glorious deeds and thereby be benefited. So we'll listen to those two sections. Hopefully we can pick this up.
Please, I should
right, so we will close with a chant, and hopefully we'll see you all next week. Next week's not Thanksgiving, no, we got 2 weeks, right? We won't have a class the day after Thanksgiving, but next week we have a class. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om peace, peace, peace. We got through half of it.